Let's begin with a word of prayer together. Holy One, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts, be pleasing and strengthening to you, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Now, one of the things I love to do is travel, whether it's locally, domestically, internationally. When I have opportunities to travel, I love to travel. And when I travel, one of the things I love to do is actually stay in people's homes rather than do hotels and motels and all the things we typically think of when we travel somewhere. And I have all kinds of fun stories of places I've traveled where I've gotten to stay with people. There was one experience where I'd finished a semester of college and I decided I was going to take a May class. It was 3 weeks long, and I was kind of out of the dorm, couldn't figure out what I was going to do for that 3 weeks. And a friend of mine said, well, my parents live close by the college. I'll just make arrangement for you to stay with them for 3 weeks. I said, is that okay? And they said, it won't be a problem. I'll talk to my parents. They'll think it's great. And sure enough, I ended up staying with Thomas's parents for 3 weeks in May while I did a class. And man, was that an awesome experience, because Betty McCracken was the best cook ever. And there was not a single dish, a meal, that was not made from scratch. I couldn't wait every morning to get from scratch biscuits and gravy to kind of set me off for the day. And we got to where every ritual was they recognized that I, as a college student, ate a lot of food, maybe more than they ate. And so as we went through the meal, as soon as they were done with the salad, and I was still eating salad, the salad bowl would be kind of pushed my direction. And then when the main course and the sides, and they were finished with that kind of got pushed my direction. And so all this food was I felt kind of awkward. All the food was around me, and they're sitting there talking to me as I'm eating. But I just remember the hospitality they provided, how awesome that experience was. I remember making a trek along the southern states toward North Carolina, then back through Tennessee, and then eventually back to Texas. And I made this big circle. And I had all these places I was going to stop along the way. And I decided, instead of staying in hotels or motels, I have friends kind of all over the place. I'm going to call and see if I could stay with them at different junctures along the way. Now, one of the places that I remember distinctly was Nashville, Tennessee. And I got to stay with Dan Mosley, and he at the time was the senior pastor of Vine Street Christian Church in Nashville. His daughter Emily was at TCU with me, and she made arrangements for me to stay with her dad in Nashville. Dan went on to be a professor at Christian Theological Seminary and practical theology and preaching, has done all these great things, but Dan welcomed me into his home for an evening, and we had just a delightful time. His oldest daughter took me to a gourmet pizza restaurant, which was great. And then the next morning, one of my customs is take a picture with the people I stay with before I leave. And so I'm in my normal outfit for the day, ready to drive off to the next destination. And Dan Mosley had still kind of was getting up, still had coffee in hand. And we ended up taking a picture on the front porch that I still look at and laugh at. I'm in my normal attire, and Dan is sitting there in his Garfield pajamas, sitting next to me as we took a picture with one another. And I thought about all the hospitalities I've shown up to places. People have rarely said, I don't think there's any space for you here. This would be a delight to have you. More times than not, it's always a joy for people to say, please just come, we'll make it work somehow. It made me think back my college days. I've kind of mentioned some college time, but I had an apartment for 4.5 years, which is the same apartment, which is in college days, to be in one place 4.5 years is a pretty lengthy time. So one of my roommates, Rob Morris, and I counted up, after 4.5 years of being in this apartment, we counted up how many people had stayed with us in that stretch of 4.5 years. And we counted up between 200 and 250 different people stayed with us in that period of time. We kind of had just an open door policy. If you're in town, call Rob and Chris, they'll house you. And we had 4 couches in our living room. We had just made, it was a kind of a crazy, and we didn't ever own one. They were all gifted to us, kind of college kind of furniture, kind of came from all over the place. But we just made places for people to sleep, stay overnight, whatever it was. Sometimes it was a youth group that stayed with us. Sometimes it was one person, a handful of people. We just made room for people. The other memory I thought about with hospitality is one of the things that Jennifer and I've loved doing is staying in bed and breakfasts versus other kinds of accommodations. We love kind of the more intimate space and getting to know the host of the household. And I can get myself into trouble with my jabbering mouth here and there from time to time. And we had just come from the Texas State Fair. And I'd said to the host, I said, there is this new item that's the new item at the Texas State Fair. It's chocolate-covered bacon sprinkled with nuts. And they had never heard of such a thing. And Jennifer goes, just please be quiet, quit telling your stories. And for breakfast the next morning, sure enough, we had chocolate-covered bacon with nuts sprinkled on top. And I think of all the memories of places we've been able to stay that was relationship-based and relational in some way, and how valuable. And I think of all the memories of people and circumstances and places, not just the places I was at, but the people I stayed with and those places and cities that I visited. I think of this because I think of this story in Luke chapter 2, which is a commonly known birth narrative of the birth of Jesus. And one of the verses I have struggled with for years is verse 7, when it says in the phrase in the verse, no room in the inn. And that really bothers me. I've really struggled with that. So I decided to take a deep dive with that verse and explore that. And one of the words that was maybe one of the tricky words in there is the word inn. And when you think of the word inn, of there's no room in the inn, the thing we typically think of is Motel 6. Hilton, places like that. That's where our brain travels when we hear the word inn. We got to think of this facility with all these rooms and all this space. And when you really look at the Greek word for inn, most scholars will tell you that's one of the worst translated words from Greek to English is the Greek word and how it's translated in most English Bibles as inn. And said it really shouldn't be inn because it conjures up all kinds of wrong images of the intent of that word. The real intent of that word inn, if we translate it more appropriately, it should be no room in the guest room is really the more appropriate translation for that word. Now, the other place that's interesting to me about the other place in Luke that we find that same word for inn is later in Luke, where Jesus has invited the disciples to go on ahead and prepare for the Passover meal. And there would be a room that they were to prepare for. That room is the upper room. The same word is for upper room is in chapter 2 we find in this birth narrative. Now, if we were to go back in time and think about how homes were constructed, the typical Jewish home in first century world maybe a little different in how we might imagine it. There is the main room, the main living space for the family or individual that lives in that household. And in most customary Jewish homes, there was a second floor. And that second floor room was considered the guest room, the place where other people would stay if they came to visit. Now, the other important piece about a Jewish home at that time is not only was the main floor and the guest room upstairs, but if you continued down the main room, there would be this drop-off and kind of like a sunken room in the back, and it would kind of extend out. That sunken room in the back was for the animals. So you begin to kind of imagine this Jewish home, and Joseph and Mary coming and knocking on the door, and they're looking for a place to stay, and probably not a random house they showed up to. As Kathy alluded to, there was a kind of a registry, a kind of an accounting going on that was happening. And if Bethlehem had been a city of origin for Joseph, he would not have gone to this town not knowing anybody. There would have been either family or distant relatives that would have known Joseph, and those would have been the first homes that Joseph would have gone to say, I need some space. We're family. We're connected to one another in some way. And so when Joseph knocks on the door and says, my future wife and I are here, she's pregnant, we need a place, the response would be, well, we have no room in the guest room, but we have a little room in the far back of the house that we can make arrangements for, and you can be back there. I know it's not the best of places, but I've already got that room is full. We can make room here. As I think about this story, it really changed the nature of this birth narrative for me in terms of, well, Joseph was going knocking from door to door to door looking for a place to stay, when actually went to the house of family. Room was made for them in that household, maybe not the accommodations they anticipated, but not a turn away, more of an embracing, but maybe not the space they had originally imagined that they were going to stay in when they got there. When I think of the idea of preparing room, first century world were wired, their whole nature was social relationships and caring for the neighbor. The whole idea was that when someone came into town, whether it was a family member, a stranger, a resident alien, it didn't matter who they were, when that person came into town, that town's social responsibility was to make sure there was arrangements and care for anybody that came in. It's not unlike what we're supposed to be doing as church today in terms of how we prepare room for people. In our 21st century world, we do not take on preparing room for friend, neighbor, stranger very well. We think about the way we design houses and neighborhoods. We have HOAs with all these rules, the things you can't do and the things you can do, and yet to navigate certain things. I mean, it'd be nice to have solar panels in our neighborhood, but our HOA says you can't do that. And so, all these little rules that are out there about things you can and can't do in your neighborhoods. And then on top of the kinds of structures around your neighborhoods is how we design houses, and we build up houses with fences and walls, and we have all these divisions because we want our private space. And in first century world, spaces were designed to be communal and have connective tissue to one another, have understanding of what it means to share and partner and be community together. There was a sense when we came in as community, there was this preparation for space for everyone to find a place and find a home, find welcome, find refuge wherever it may be. The church has an opportunity, I think, to engage what it means to be a preparing kind of room or a preparing kind of space. We are probably about to enter a pretty tenuous zone in our life. Anybody that's a migrant, a refugee, an immigrant, is going to feel very unsafe about their situation, about where they are and what's important to them. Will they get to stay here or not? Will they continue to keep their place of living? Will they be deported somewhere else? There need to be places where people feel safe for people just to be who they are. As we encountered in adult ed today, what it means to have safe places for people in the LGBTQ community and particularly the trans community. What it means to provide a prepared space of welcome and care and inclusion rather than wondering if, will I be included? Will someone care for me? Will I be excluded in some way? The church has a real opportunity to me, take on that idea of the Greek word that's mistranslated as in, and take on the idea of a church can be a guest room for anybody searching for that place in their life. Now, if you were to go to our website, you would find there on the website a shalom statement, some of our values that are important to us on the website. If you were to go drive by the front of the church, you'll see this diversity banner out front. If you are here for the opening of worship every week, we say, who's welcome? And we have this wide open welcome. We have plenty of places around the world that says all are welcome, but that's not always true. We need to be clear and specific about our values of what it means to prepare a space that is open, encouraging, and flourishing, and not forcing people to be someone they're not, but allowing people to thrive in the person they are and the person they will become. Joseph and Mary made their way to Bethlehem. And it was probably a tenuous time for them, knowing that birth was close at hand. And one of the things they knew, probably going in a way I hadn't imagined before, is they went into Bethlehem knowing there will be a place for us. there'll be a room for us and we will not have to worry. That's not necessarily the way our humanity navigates itself today, but I think the church has an opportunity to counter that narrative that's out there. That someone rings the doorbell, knocks on the door, swings open the door and walks in, we can say, there is a place for you here. We have a place in the guest room. There's a place down here. There's a place on the main floor. And I'll even throw in chocolate-covered bacon with nuts on top. But there is a place, and we prepare room for one another. We truly prepare room for someone like me, someone like you, someone very different than who you know to be. That welcome is wide open. So may we be about preparing spaces and rooms and communities that embody the very things we know to be true, that have been true from the very time of Joseph and Mary and generations before that, of what it means to welcome the stranger, the resident alien, the person that needs the greatest care in their life. Everyone needs a place that is safe and loving and caring. And even more than that, places that allow the best of themselves to shine in the world. We know when that child was eventually born into the world, brought nuances of light to people they had never imagined possible in terms of the person and the people and the community they could become. May we be a people of preparing room.